Okay, I know it's been a long day for many of you, so we promise we're going to be fairly brief, but I think this book really deserves your attention. And this is our fourth book launch now in different parts of Europe. And it's a very auspicious occasion that we're actually doing it today on Europe Day as well, and Victory Day. And I wanted to correct Alan when you said change can happen in Belarus. No, change will happen in Belarus. That's how we should actually think about it. So my name.
Eventually.
Well, change is a food because change is happening anyway. So it will happen eventually, today, tomorrow, who knows? But it is ongoing. So my name is Elena Korosteleva. I'm professor of politics and global sustainable development at the University of Warwick. I also lead the Institute of Global Sustainable Development, and I'm sure my fellow panelists will introduce themselves. Perhaps, yes. And we can go.
Yeah, we can give the secret. Yeah, Joris Education, PhD students at the University of Warwick, the politics department.
Exactly.
And I'm Paul Hansbury. I'm a research fellow. I work with Elena on, we have this Warwick, Ukraine, Belarus hub.
Yeah. I'm Igor Ivanov. I'm founding editor of Skaryna Press, Belarusian publishing house in London.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Before we delve into the book and do the book launch, I probably will do kind of very, very brief acknowledgements because it's very important to mention a few things about how the book actually came to be and be launched here. And also to mention that given that it's a fourth book launch, so we had one in Brussels in Belarus mission, it's part of Belarus Week in Europe in December. Then we also, students also did launch one in Prague, also involving people who were involved in Prague Spring. So having that kind of dialogue, voices of a generation, which was very interesting. The third one took place in Warsaw. Unfortunately, none of us could be there. I don't know, even if you were there, brilliant. So I will catch you later on your reflections there. But it was very much driven by students there. So this is the fourth one. We are doing it in London properly. And the book is there on the table. And there will be another wave of kind of various publications on Belarus at our conference that we're organizing at Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. In Whitehall on the 26th of June. The conference is titled Ukraine, Belarus, and the complex geopolitics.
Ukraine, Belarus, and the complex geopolitics of Europe.
Yeah, so which will involve academics, early career researchers delivering their projects, but also policymakers and politicians. So if you're interested, please find us on WebHub and register, because unfortunately, given some safety concerns, access will be controlled with ID. So only those who are registered will be able to participate. Okay, right. So I'll sit down before I fall down. So a few acknowledgements. First of all, we're very, very grateful to the financial support of Warwick Ukraine Belarus Hub, who provided financial resources through funding from Research England to be able to publish this, but to be able to bring this book to life, let's put it this way. We also would like to formally acknowledge the financial support of the fund Science at Risk and their director, Dr. Philip Schmedeke, for the project Belarusian Students Against the Authoritarian Regime, which actually enabled the submissions of essays by the students to a dedicated project website. The fund also gave us formal permission to basically bring this book to life in terms of publication. We also would like to acknowledge student contributors as well for their courage, perseverance, and sacrifice, and also anonymous project coordinator who actually made these essays happen, brought them together, published on the website, and then eventually worked with us on making it happen. we also would like to acknowledge also various contributions, including Pavel Latushka, who gave the afterword, but also Skaryna Press, without which we would have not seen book published, becoming a tangible volume, both in English, but also in Belarusian and Russian. I also would like to say thank you to Paul in particular, who actually not only reviewed, but also proofread and helped us with books realization. So there are many things to mention here, but obviously all of it, I think all the acknowledgements are there in the book. So for those who are interested, please follow the publication. So now about the book itself. Let's just think about the context. I mean, I'm sure you all talked about Belarus and different aspects of Belarus development and progression. And we know that one of the most pressing problems still that remains today in Belarus is obviously Belarus political prisoners of Lukashenko regime. And according to some numbers, UTS in particular, those who are staying behind the bars in Belarus for political reasons could reach about 5,000 now. But according to international human rights organizations, the recognized political prisoners are coming to nearly 3,000. At least it was at the time of writing, as I registered there. But what we also know, like with any change of regime and protests and so on, students are always in the forefront of it. And we know that at that time, tens of thousands of Belarusian students, they openly challenged, they took it to the streets, they challenged the aggressive regime. And that was happening for a number of months, started in August. And I remember there was even a dedicated day to student protest, like there was a day dedicated to women's protest, to disabled people protest, and there was a combined protest on every Sunday. And so yeah,
Students.
yeah, and students. So, but what is also important to mention that those students also were persecuted by the regime. And according to the Association of Belarusian Students in November 2021, there were nearly 500 politically motivated detentions of students. Nearly 300 of them faced expulsions from wherever they were, across Belarus, and 52 criminal charges against students in Belarus. So at least 530 students were testified to pressure from the leadership of universities for their civic position. So students who were involved in this book, we have 25 essays here. It was from their own experience. Some were detained, some managed to escape from persecution. And they all reflected on their experience that year, 2020. That's why the Belarus called the Unbroken Generation, Youth Voices of Belarus 2020. And each chapter is path in its own right. It is also a very heartfelt experience of what those students actually went through. So the book is written by these students, and we call this book the Unbroken Generation because we believe that basically those young voices, despite hardship, maltreatment, violence and trauma, they reflected on what they went through, and all their voices, every single essay basically remain still very positive about their future, or at least the future they want to see. And in my introduction, I reflected on the moment of people forming or peoplehood. And that was a particular moment when actually people, obviously peoplehood and people forming can take generations. But what was interesting that those voices, they actually were kind of reincarnation of that process on its own, through their individual stories, but also through coming together. It is precisely about Belarusian people forming in many, many different ways. why this book is important, at least for me. You know, we always say that every book is a journey, and it is true. But, and, you know, when we were in those events, 2020 and later, we always kind of believe that some of it kind of could be etched in our memory forever. It is true, it could be. And yet, you know, when as time goes, we tend to forget the nuances, the details, and what actually the experiences, the emotions were held there. So to me, this book is important because we managed to record those nuances, those raw emotions, those hardships, and everything that was connected to the student experience. So it's very important because it also links us to the process of people forming, because without storytelling, we will not be able to carry it forward in terms of enacting change. Because, you know, with people forming, what happens is, yes, there was a moment of shared peoplehood, but that moment kind of ebbs down again. And in order for it to continue to grow, we need those storytellings. And this story is one of those. And the whole range of different books that tell us about what people feel, how they struggle, how they survive, what they fight for, is very, very important. So we must ensure that all the stories are recorded, because it's not just about memory, it's about remembrance. It's about telling us which way we are progressing forward and why we need to progress forward because of these stories. And the second point I just want to mention there, I know I only wanted to take 5 minutes, but of course it's, you know, it comes with the territory. So just to conclude, the other moment that I reflect on here is the trauma. And that's very, very important point, because obviously all the students, and you will see there are drawings were done by a student who was imprisoned, and she survived, and she reflected it through her own drawings, her own experience. Trauma is what marked 2020 plus. Trauma that what has marked, especially that young generation. And the best way to deal with trauma, if I were to go back to Slovenian philosopher Zizek, what he said, the best way to deal with trauma is actually simply mark it. It's very difficult being, you know, humans. We tend to forget, push it back, push it somewhere away from our mind, those very difficult, traumatizing moments in our life, because we're designed that way. We want to head forward into a happy future. And yet trauma still stays with us. It's like a scar that cannot be eradicated. And what is important, that how we feel about the trauma and how we actually learn to overcome that trauma in the best way is actually simply by marking that trauma. And this book is precisely marking that trauma. So the scar is there, the scar will stay for life. How can we reconcile with that trauma? The trauma that touched the Belarusian people, the trauma that is currently touching so many Ukrainians, the trauma that touched people in the US, you know, 9/11 at that time. So people in Gaza, those traumas, they need to be recorded, marked, so that we can come back to them through remembering them and thinking how we can ensure that it will never happen again in that sense. So for me, it's also very poignant that we're talking about this book today, the Victory Day, V-Day, because with this book and all the reflections and positivity despite trauma and harrowing experience, the positivity is there. Those young people, they believe in their better future. And I think with that, we all need to as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. For the publishing house, it was an interesting, challenging, and rewarding experience. It took about a year to publish this book. I didn't expect anything like that, but actually there are 28 authors, so 25 students who have busy lives, some with traumas. Some of them don't want to talk again about their life in Belarus. So there was a bit of challenge with engaging with all 25 students. On the other hand, some of them volunteered to do extra work, go extra mile, produce illustrations, contact their peers, encourage them, and drag them from discouragement. So there was a lot going on there. And then we had to do translation, and it had to be done by somebody who understands the situation from within. So translation was done in Belarus by somebody who since then has lost their job in Belarus at university, and they're now abroad, as well as students whose work they translated. In the process of working on this book, what also became obvious that actually this book is not only about Belarus. This book is about people, young people, coming to understanding, to awareness that something horrible is happening to their country, and what am I going to do? And of course, there is no one right answer, because personal experience are personal experience. We all are different, and that's those stories tell those. Yeah, I'll mention what is. Yeah, I'll explain what's happening on the screen in a second. So we in the publishing house and people who, our friends, we started talking about this book as a book about universal experience of facing autocracy. Going to prison, being tortured, running away, hiding, surviving traumas, and living afterwards to our best abilities. So this book is translatable, comprehensible throughout the cultures. And I already can see some signs of it. A few weeks ago, I was contacted by Padua University in Italy saying that they adopted this book for a seminar with their students, undergrad students who are working on the theme of human rights, as a source book. And on the screen, you can see, okay, if you purchase this book and you don't want it as a printed copy, I'm very happy to refund it, because this book is available as a free PDF copy on the publisher's website. Go to Skaryna Press, you will find this book in Belarusian, Russian, and in English, 2 editions. Please share that PDF. Printed books, they fly as, what is the word? As a hotcakes. Here we are. Just another few months, there will be no copies left anyway. So yeah, thank you very much. It was a rewarding experience for the publishing house.
So we're going to hear the first of 2 excerpts from the book. So Yehor is going to read an excerpt.
So that's one by Tatiana, or at least that's the name used in the book. And obviously there's the relatively longer passage, so we're not going to read the entirety of it. And I'll read it in the original form, which is in this case the Russian language. And some of them are in Belarusian, some of them are in Russian. Some of them acknowledge the fact that there are 2 languages. Some people hesitate that they write in Russian, but that's a good mixture of the 2. And well, that one specifically says it from Tatiana. Меня зовут Таня. Сейчас мне 21 год, хотя многие говорят, что тюремные годы не в счет. В таком случае можно считать, что мне все еще 19. Именно столько мне исполнилось, когда меня задержал КГБ. Но начну с более ранних событий. Родилась и выросла я в Минске, закончила физико-математический класс в Минской гимназии. В школе мне легче всего давались математика с физикой, так что вопрос выбора специальности почти не стоял. Я часто задумываюсь о том, как те или иные события могут коренным образом повлиять на нашу жизнь. В моей судьбе поворотным решением стало поступление на мехмат БГУ. Как потом оказалось, это самый движовый и активный факультет университета. Не могу сказать, что я была в числе лучших студентов, но учеба меня интересовала. Я старалась от нее не отставать. Единственный предмет, который я терпеть не могла, это политология. Помню, как-то раз преподаватель даже выгнал меня из аудитории за то, что я спала на его семинаре. А вот если бы не спала, кто знает, может быть, события развивались бы по-другому. В тот момент я определенно и точно собиралась закончить учебу в Беларуси. Да и после окончания вуза мне все еще предстояло отработать пару лет. Перспектива переехать куда-то за границу. Я, если рассматривала, то как-то очень далекое и туманное будущее. Помню, как шла на свои первые выборы 9 августа 2020 года. Тогда я думала, что это действительно очень важно и ужасно волновалась. После голосования мы с мамой зашли в наш любимый минский ресторан «Васильки» и выпили пару настоек за это. В тот день в городе было поразительно спокойно.
I'm just going to say a few words. I will be brief. I'm just going to make 3 points basically. So my first encounter with this book was when the University of Warwick was first becoming involved, and Victor Shadurski, the co-editor with Elena, sent a few essays as samples that were forwarded to me to look at as well. And actually, the very first thing I read was from the essay you just heard from. The very first thing I read was the essay that began, I'm 21 years old. But they tell me that the years spent in prison don't count. And that's a very simple but a very powerful idea. If you don't count something, then it can't break you. And I think I wanted the English language version carries the title The Unbroken Generation. Now, I'm not sure how the title came about. I imagine that these things come around in different ways. It may even have just been it may have been the translator, it may have been the editors, I don't know. But when I was in Prague a few weeks ago as part of one of the other events concerning this book, someone in the audience asked a very intelligent question. They asked if the title of the English version was an allusion to Gertrude Stein, who spoke of the lost generation after the First World War. And I have no idea if there is anything in the minds when this was done. I mean, it's obviously, this is not a lost generation. That's partly the whole point. But regardless of whether that was in the minds of the translator or the editors when they were picking the title, it still stands and it's still valid to think of that in that literary context. And so my first point is that titles can be very, very powerful. And the Belarusian original title, version, Skaryna Pokolenia, I think that conveys a slightly different sense, this non-uprootedness, but it's the same. Again, it's very powerful, and this and so that's important. The texts themselves. So what did I think when I read through them? First of all, in fact, I'm now jumping forward 6 months to when they'd all been translated and I read them all in the English versions. So these the authors of these texts are united by their common plight. They have been persecuted by the political regime. They spent time in prison. But despite this common experience thing that unified them, what really struck me was how diverse, how different they were in terms of their backgrounds, in terms of their interests. And I think, so this is my second point, it really underscores something about the protests. Yes, this is about a generation, but, and I would make the point that the protests were not just about that generation. But nonetheless, as a slice of the people who were protesting, the diversity of voices in there really underscores the fact that the protests were not some core of already politically active individuals. Actually, some of the authors expressed the fact that they weren't particularly interested in politics prior to this. In this moment, they suddenly understood. They recognized that politics matters. Sometimes they knew they were taking risks about their future. They were optimistic about the future. They've come out of it, they reflecting on it. They're scarred, but they are resolute that change will come. And so that leads to the question of why this book is important to, perhaps, I mean, obviously we hope that everyone in the room reads it, but also why is it important beyond this room to non-Belarusians, to particularly thinking of the fact that there's an English language copy? Why is it important to people who are not Belarusian and who don't study Belarus or have connections to Belarus? Well, there's a few quick points here. Bringing together this generation's voices and recording what happened to them is something that isn't found elsewhere about what Belarus has gone through. There are individual memoirs and texts, but collecting them together is something special. And it's something that's left out of narrative accounts or academic histories, edited volumes by academics about 2020 or about the past and the future of an independent Belarus. Just going back to the event in Prague, which for me was quite a humbling thing, because I was sat like I am now on a panel of people. On that occasion, on either side of me, I had one of the authors of the essays, and so between them, they had spent several years in prison, yeah, so it was quite humbling sitting there. And someone had asked a question in the audience, and they directed the question at me, and it was a very good question. And I'm sure I knew there was a very good answer, but on the spot, I was in a mental panic and I couldn't think what to do. So I just started rambling things that seemed relevant to the point. And you never know what you might say that kind of someone latches onto. And then afterwards, at the reception, a journalist was tugging at my sleeve saying, "You said something, can you say that again? I want that for my publication. What did you mean?" And so I had to think back about what I'd said. But what I'd said, and I'm building up to my third and final point here, is I talked about how, I said something about how there was a bit of uninterest in some Western European societies and North America, liberal democracies, a lack of commitment to the democratic institutions. There was this sense, and I'd said something about how democracy is quite fragile and we take it for granted often. I was thinking particularly about some opinion polling of the same generation of people, but not Belarusians, the same generation of Brits or Americans, and where there's a significant kind of proportion of people expressing the view that they might be okay living under an autocracy. And so my third point, so same generation, different context. And so my third and final point is that the book is also a warning for the non-Belarusian reader, for the reader in liberal democracies, whether that's the UK or elsewhere, that if we lose the political system that we have, then it can be hard to recover, because dislodging dictators is mighty hard. But as this book reminds us, people do retain that hope in Belarus. They are unbroken. So yeah, that's my final point. And we will hear a second excerpt from the book.
Yes, Tanya proceeds to describe how she was detained and spent some time in prison, and then there's kind of the section where she kind of recalls the first time she has ever experienced the arresting procedure in her grandparents' house. В тюрьме я больше всего боялась, что меня кто-нибудь не дождется. Потерю родных там перенести невозможно. В день задержания КГБшникам надо было провести обыск, кроме как в моей квартире, еще и в квартире моих бабушки и дедушки. Силовики согласились ничего не говорить про мой арест, а сказать, что я просто помогаю в раскрытии какого-то дела. Дверь открыла своими ключами. Естественно, в квартире ничего не нашли, только зря взволновали стариков. И наступает момент, когда нам нужно уходить. Я прощаюсь. Оставляю свои ключи на тумбочке. Бабушка спрашивает, вернусь ли я. А дед говорит: ты что, не видишь, что ее уводят? Мне так хотелось обнять бабушку и сказать ей, что все будет хорошо. Но я старалась сделать вид, что ухожу ненадолго, а объятия бы выдали всю суть происходящего. Я даже не обняла ее. После закрытия дела бабуля еще приезжала ко мне на свидание в СИЗО. Помню, меня поразило тогда, какой седой она стала. Она очень постарела и изменилась. В тот день я видела ее в последний раз. Уже в колонии я узнала, что не стало деда. Бабушка прожила без него всего полгода. Из колонии я им даже не звонила. Сейчас я уже полгода на свободе. За это время со мной случилось столько всего, сколько не происходило за всю жизнь. Я нелегально пересекла границу, я стала жить одна в чужой стране. Я поступила в университет на специальности, которые только мечтать могла. Побывала на множестве официальных встреч, о которых даже и подумать не могла, что когда-нибудь побываю. Выучила английский. И хотя многие воспоминания о тюрьме в моей памяти все еще очень яркие, верить в то, что я действительно была там, что все это происходило со мной, становится все труднее. Время, помноженное на расстояние, творит чудеса, и, оглядываясь назад, я однозначно могу сказать: никаких сожалений. Я ничего не боюсь, я ни о чем не жалею, я ничего не стала бы менять. Если бы не этот опыт, я бы никогда не оказалась на том месте, где я сейчас. Я ни за что бы не научилась верить в себя, ни за что бы не научилась не бояться.
Yeah, thank you very much. And as I understand, you can buy this book here. The selling featured there.
Or download it for free from the I'm going to share.
Thank you very much. Well, you can proceed back to your drinks and snacks and stuff. We have around maybe half an hour before we need to leave, and then we'll share a pub nearby where people can go after this party is over.